If I were to only do three movements, I'd be pretty happy benching, squatting, and deadlifting. And bench in particular, I think is funny because it gets a bad rep. And when I started lifting, I always say the story of I actively didn't bench press because I'm like, I don't want to have man boobs. That's silly. This was a fun one I saw, and I actually created this off of a Reddit thread I found. And the question was, what are the best exercises that change your physique the most visually? And I thought this was a really fun question because we spoke a lot last week as well about like some of the worst exercises and things we'd want to avoid. And we mentioned how it's so different for everyone. There's things that Kyle could do that would be amazing for him, that would be really bad for me. Case in point, you need to adapt in your journey. You find some new movements that are phenomenal. You find some that aren't great. But I do find there are some movements that pretty universally lead to massive physique change. And these are some of my favorites to program. So I wrote some of my favorites here. I'm going to ask Kyle to chime in with a couple of his. But off the top of my head, and this was actually the top of the thread that was really cool. And this was the mention of lateral raises for just being amazing at popping your shoulder, helping you with that V look. And what's amazing about really capping out your delts, if you will, whether you're male or female, this is a fantastic thing to do because when you think of that superhero look, when you think of like the letter V, if you have a wide shoulder base and you can make yourself look wider by having more curved out delts, you'll actually make your waist look smaller and you'll actually present yourself as looking a lot bigger. And I find lateral raises are just money in terms of having your shoulder grow, really getting that width. They feel amazing. I think it's one of my favorite movements. I know Kyle personally really enjoys them quite a lot. And I thought this was a great mention. In general, lateral raises are amazing. And I wanted to pair that with face pulls as well, alongside cross arm rear delt. Rear delt work is so amazing. Once again, for men and women, it should be a priority of your routine because it's actually going to pull you back. So naturally, you think there's so many things that pull us forward. They cause a hunch over. Guys training a lot of chest, girls having chests, and just in general typing, being hunched over, all these things can cause you to hunch forward and actually cause you to have some postural deficiencies. And face pulls and rear delt work in general are a great way to work against this and actually create some change. So those are like two of the things that really came to mind. And even rear delts, what's amazing about them, when you think of your shoulder, it's three heads, right? Deltoid. So you have your anterior head, your lateral head, and your posterior head. So the front, the side, and the back in layman's terms. And once you actually work all three, you create this really nice cap to your delt. It creates like a full circle around it, and it really makes your shoulders look full, muscular, and healthy. And it's such a big difference, someone who trains rear delts versus someone who doesn't. So in terms of visuals, this was probably two of my favorites to share.
Honestly, that was great, and it was a good reminder, like back in the day when we were learning about the anatomy and whatnot, because it's like when you look at most people, like a lot of guys will just do pressing, right? So as Josh mentioned, the posterior gets neglected because it's often not the thing that most people see, right? The first thing they see is the front of your shoulder, the side and stuff. So I really like that. And my biggest thing I'm gonna have to say is just gonna have to be bench press. Like, especially within my last DEXA scan, I feel like as I started to increase more bench pressing, like I feel like it just gave me such great bang for my buck. And when you look at most movements, like I will say it's definitely beneficial to get more out of it. And what I mean by that is like bench press for me will target my chest really nicely, but because it's a nice pressing movement, it'll also get a bit of my shoulders, the anterior head, and then also get some triceps as well, which is just like a nice movement that like any compound to me will just do you so well. And I think a lot of people will miss out on it because it's such a hard thing. So I found that from me incorporating that more often with really good form, with some heavy load, that did me really well. And then I'll say, honestly, lat pull downs and any sort of rows to me is just like an absolute fundamental. Like it's just something that helps the back so nicely. And those are gonna be some of my staples that have helped in so many different ways over the years. And they'll always be staples probably for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's really hard. If you know me and Kyle, I was tempted just to put compounds here as the big one. Like if I were to only do three movements, I'd be pretty happy benching, squatting, and deadlifting. And bench in particular, I think is funny because it gets a bad rep. And when I started lifting, I always say the story of I actively didn't bench press because I'm like, I don't want to have man boobs. That's silly. Like, but I didn't really understand what it was. I didn't understand pecs. It's funny how naive we are when we start. But in general with bench press too, I think there's such an attitude of like, I don't want to have a super muscular chest, especially for women. And I actually challenged a lot of my female clients to participate in the bench press. And the reason for this is what's cool about bench squat and deadlift is you should be able to pull your body weight up. You should be able to push your body weight off the ground, and you should be able to squat your body weight. Like, you should be able to move yourself quite well. And pressing power, because it's so uncommon and it's almost so impractical, because how often do you need to actually push something in the form of the bench press? Very rarely, but it's a great strength to train because you're actually going to build out your shoulders, you're going to build out your triceps, your chest, you're going to get a lot of upper body power, and it's a great way to really build that. And obviously you can temper this to be more accurate for you. You can do dumbbell press, you can do slow negatives, but in general, it is a really amazing feeling to be strong here. And especially if you want to put on upper body mass, I started actually widening my grip with bench, and you can really change your bench based on where you're at in your journey. And with that, obviously I was bringing in more of my shoulder, and I've noticed my shoulder develop more and more. Within those movements, I'm actually able to get a lot of benefit, and it's definitely amazing just to be able to be strong in those. And with that as well, I just even wanted to share squats and deadlifts. As I mentioned, like, squats are phenomenal, right? Everyone says like leg press is like a poor man's squat, and people get all upset about it, but squat is so fun because you need so much stability. It really maxes out your bracing, really shows you how to move weight to really sit down with it and stand up with it in a really healthy way. And they're hard for a reason, and that's because it's going to help you grow, it's going to help you develop. Nothing gets me more sore than like some killer squats. And then deadlifts as well are just such a great test of, there's this weight on the ground, can I pick it up? So in general, like, these, even though you see them as strength-based movements, there's no hiding. I can hide very easily in my hypertrophy movements. You can do curls and stop 20 short. When there's a heavy weight, it's like, can I do this or not? And that's where I find compounds are so powerful, is it really shows you, hey, I can push myself. This is what intensity should feel like. I am a strong person. And you can gain quite a lot of confidence from that. So these are actually like big movers, especially if you want to put on a lot of muscle, or if you want to lose a lot of weight. You're going to burn a ton of calories, you're going to recruit a ton of muscles, and for that reason, these are absolutely phenomenal.
You know, I like that Josh said, like, if he were to just do a few movements, he'd be really happy doing those compounds. I can't say it'd be too, like, it's good. It feels incredible. Like, it's just, they're hard though. That's where so many people struggle. Like, we did our powerlifting competition mock meet like last week, and I felt so fired up, like lifting heavy weight. I got back to 500. I'm getting into my thoughts here a little bit earlier, but it was just like one of those things where when you do them, like, and especially you do them right, they're so incredible. And on that note of Josh mentioning the top 3 movements, like, you know, just being the compounds, if you were to just be able to do a few exercises, and I got to start by saying this is where people go wrong, is like, most influencers out there are posting these crazy unique things where you're doing 2 things at once, where you're just doing something that looks sexier than it needs to be, right? So the main movements that you should be doing, and they must be done, and I would just do, if I only were to do 7 movements, it would be a squat, or sorry, starting off, it would be a push, which would be bench press, a pull, which would be deadlift, a squat, which would just be a squat, a hinge, which would be, it could be, you know, a stiff leg deadlift. It could be the remaining, like Josh had mentioned. It would be a heavy row. That would be an incorporated thing. And then it would be a carry, just because it's more functional, or some sort of carry, whether it's a farmer's walk or whatnot. And then I would add in maybe some hip thrusts, just because I think they're incredible and everyone can benefit from them from a postural standpoint and everything like that. So once again, just the big thing to think about is that a lot of these are great movements, and I just see so many people overcomplicating it or doing things that may not work as well. Whereas, like, if I were to do a heavy row compared to just a bicep curl, the heavy row will get your back, it'll get your core because you have to stabilize, it'll get your biceps because you're doing a pulling movement which incorporates your biceps. So I always think of best bang for my buck, but that's my last thought, and I hope it gives you some things to think about.
Yeah, if you think like a hamburger has buns, carbs, it has veggies, it has cheese, it has protein. There's a lot that comes in it, and compounds are very much that way. There's obviously one thing it's more predominant in, but also you can get more into nuanced hypertrophy, and you can get like just the lettuce, just the onion, like with these more isometric based movements where it's just isolating one muscle, you're working it. But compounds are so powerful because it forces you to work them as a whole, to learn major patterns, like Kyle said, like hinging in particular is such a core of so much of you do. So it was really hard narrowing down this list and just sharing a few of our favorites. There are literally a million movements I love, and I think they all have a place. But the last really cool one I'll share, I think, and that's really underutilized is, well, it's getting more popular now, but Romanian deadlifts for glutes and or stiff leg deadlifts. So either or, depending on your mobility and how confident you are. I really like stiff leg. A lot of people really like Romanian. They find they get great glute activation from that. But if you actually want to grow your glutes, this is a great way to do it. If you do it heavy, you do them with good control. I just find it really fires the glutes, and it's a really great way to build them out. So whether male or female, you want to grow your glutes, definitely be sure to implement them, as they're absolutely fantastic. But those are some of our favorites. We could definitely do a part 2. Like I said, these are kind of like my bread and butter. I program these quite significantly, and especially the shoulder stuff, what was on my mind, I was pretty excited to share that. So thought that was a pretty fun question. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you're new around here, this is Motivation Monday, where we answer your questions, share where we're at in our journey, and share some of our favorite quotes. And I'm going to pass off to Kyle to hear what his quote is of this week.